Our top story, new details in the shooting on the UCCS campus. We're hearing from the chancellor of the university about the school's response to the deadly shooting earlier this year. Samuel Knopp and Celie Montgomery were killed when a gunman opened fire inside a UCCS dorm. Knopp's roommate has been charged with their murders. UCCS hired an outside law firm to look over the school's policies and put together a report with recommendations for the school. News 5's Maggie Bryan has been digging into that report and joins us live now from the UCCS campus. Maggie.
Megan, this 91-page report lays out more than a dozen ways the school can improve to help keep students safe. The university says this is their way of being transparent with the community following that shooting back in February. We noticed some of the recommendations laid out in this report fall in line with what one former campus leader says he'd been calling for months before the tragic deaths.
This is not how we expected our spring semester to go.
It's been nearly 10 months since the UCCS dorm room shooting that killed 2 people.
Housing officials and police were very aware of the issues there.
And 10 months of some students calling for more transparency from the university about what led up to the deaths.
Thank you all for being with us today.
Now the university is releasing a third-party report looking at how well the school responded to the crisis. The school hired former Colorado Springs Mayor John Suthers and attorney Jason Dunn to do the report. It shares new details about the ongoing conflict between the suspected gunman Nicholas Jordan and his roommate Samuel Knopp, who was one of the victims. Knopp had reported the suspect to campus housing for smoking in his room and not cleaning up after himself. The report says both of the students made attempts to switch housing but never completely followed through on their requests. The report says Knopp had later made plans to move out on February 16th, the day of the shooting.
Our staff, as you can see in the report, offered alternative housing multiple times to the roommates. And the roommates, for each of their own various different decisions at different times, chose not to take advantage of those alternative housing options.
In a press conference just hours after the report was released, Chancellor Jennifer Sobonet said while the report gives several recommendations for improvements, they're not considered violations.
We have staff members and faculty here who carry guilt to this day, and it is important to acknowledge that there is ultimately one individual responsible for these crimes, and that is the person who committed the crimes.
The recommendations include a better software system to track complaints about students' behavior. Chancellor Sobonet says that change has been made. Other recommendations include making updates to the school's emergency operations plan, which was last revised in 2016, plus more emergency training for staff. A few months ago, we spoke with the university's now former emergency management director, who was at UCCS at the time of the shooting. He says he had been calling for these improvements for almost a year, but could not train his staff until his new emergency plan was approved by campus leaders.
Basically, we had a plan that was collecting dust or on a shelf somewhere, and so it was useless. I was constantly badgering and trying to get this thing signed off, but it was continuously just pushed to the side, right, delayed.
I asked Chancellor Sobonet why staff never signed off on that plan.
The plan that was developed was a very detailed, long plan that wasn't as easy to follow.
She says their newly hired emergency manager will complete a new plan to be approved next spring. Then they can conduct more campus-wide emergency exercises. In this report, the law firm says they reached out to that former emergency manager to include his perspective in this report. They say they set up an interview with him, but then he later declined to talk. I spoke with that former employee today who says because the law firm contacted him in October, he says it felt like a last-minute request and that it wasn't sincere. You can read the full report online at KOAA.com. For now, on campus at UCCS, I'm Maggie Bryan, News 5.
Maggie, thanks. The trial for the accused shooter, Nicholas Jordan, is scheduled for April of 2025, more than a year after the attack. Jordan's mental state has been under the microscope this entire year. He's had 2 separate mental evaluations to determine whether he can stand trial. Last month, Jordan entered a plea of not guilty. During that hearing, the judge allowed the defense until January 31st to amend his plea to not guilty by reason of insanity. He'll be in court again in late January for a status hearing.